Thank you for the introduction and thank you for the great keynote speaker. Thanks for listening to my presentation. My research titles MedDRA-ICD mapping evaluation based on UMLS and OHDSI. And I'm a PhD candidate from University of Texas Health Science Center at Houston. So first, a little bit more background of my study. So what's the motivation? We're really trying to solve the problem of semantic interoperability, which is really essential for big data analysis. And we believe that the terminology mapping is the bridge, and it can serve the three purposes. That first, it can help with the data integration to create large-scale data sets that can link the data compiled in different terminology. And second, it can help to cross-validation to validate the new signals detected from one data source with those other data sources. And third, we believe to link the heterogeneous data resources, we can actually help the research discovery to expand the scope of the existing research by including new information from different resources. So here is a brief example of why we wanted to MedDRA and ICD for our illustration. So the blue table is a representation of some data columns from a FAIRS database. So that is a database designed by the FDA to help with taking the record of the adverse reaction of people suffering from drug and vaccination. So it used the MedDRA as the indicator because it is designed to record the adverse reaction. And the green table is actually a representation of a common EHR table. So it has the patient's ID, their demographic information, as well as the ICD billing code. So it is used most frequently to taking the patient's activity into account, and also there is impossible to find the adverse reaction, the MedDRA in the EHR, because they didn't have people to record the adverse reaction of people specifically. So if we wanted to verify the signal, we're trying to find the adverse reaction of patients from the EHR data, we need to link the MedDRA and the ICD so that we can have a consistent comparison. So I'm going to dive more into the definition of those terms. I know I have been talking about pretty general terms. So first, what is MedDRA? The full name for MedDRA is a medical dictionary for drug regulatory activities, and the ICD is International Classification of Disease. So the linkage between MedDRA and ICD is really essential for drug safety and pharmacosurveillance research, where MedDRA is commonly used in reporting adverse reactions and drug safety signals in not only FAIRS, but also some Canada and Europe vigilance database. And it consists of 5 hierarchies, and from SOC, it reaches the highest level, all the way down to the preferred term and lowest level term, where the preferred term by its name is the most frequently used level of term for MedDRA to record the adverse reaction. And then the ICD code, it is a medical classification system for disease laboratory findings and causes of injury and disease. And also ICD-CM is the United States version, the clinical modification of the ICD code. So we utilize both the ICD-9-CM and 10-CM in our study, because 9-CM is used to code and classify mobility data from inpatient and outpatient records. And ICD-10-CM was implemented in 2015 to replace the ICD-9-CM as the reimbursement code. And it has been expanded to include more health conditions. And then I want to talk about the two data sources that we use. One is the UMLS methods. So the UMLS is a common vocabulary that links different biomedical terminology, and it uses a ID named CUI, which is, we just call it QE, to link the synonymous terms and identify useful relationship between concepts and preserve the meaning, concept names, and relationships from each vocabulary set. And these relationships are recorded in multiple files. You can find them in the MR console, the MReal, and the MMap. And we chose MR console for our mapping because it contains the majority of the QE ID. And also the asymmetric relationships are specified in other files. So as you can see, here is a screenshot of the UMLS MedDRA API, the browser, and I can dive further into that later. And then brief introduction of OHDSI. So the full name is Observational Health Data Science and Informatics. So OHDSI is developed as a common vocabulary to better assist researchers who use observational data for post-marketing drug safety surveillance. And it also provides a relationship table that encodes the predefined mapping pairs across various terminologies. And we extract the mapping pairs from the OHDSI OMAP CDM using both the direct and indirect mapping methods. And we can talk about the methodology in the later section. So here's the workflow of our study. So first, we extract the mapping pairs for MedDRA and ICD from both UMLS and the OHDSI OMAP. And then we further evaluate the mapping quality by extracting the map pairs from UMLS. And we actually recruit human experts to evaluate the quality of the map pairs provided by UMLS. And we also want to know what are the reasons that there are a lot of the pairs remain unmapped. So we also recruited a different group of the domain experts to help us find any possible improvement for the unmapped PT terms from MedDRA system. So here is how we did the retrieval for the map pairs. Because the 9 and 10 cm have been used recently in EHR, and we wanted to include all of them if we want to do a retrospective study for the EHR data. And both PD and LLT are mentioned in the mapping relationships in both UMLS and OHDSI. So we created multiple mapping pairs from MedDRA PT to ICD 9 cm to 10 cm, and also the MedDRA LLT level to 9 cm and 10 cm code. And we used both direct and indirect mapping for the overall mapping extraction. So in the direct mapping method, for the UMLS, we simply just use the QEID, which indicates the terms are as synonymous. And for the indirect mapping method, we actually use a intermediate data terminology, which is called the SNOMED-CT. So SNOMED-CT is designed for the purpose similar to the adverse reaction, and it is discovered in the EHR vendor. But the reason we did the MedDRA-ICD mapping is because, according to a study, only about 10 to 30% of the EHR vendors contains the SNOMED-CT code. But ICD code, because that is required for the billing purposes, so all the EHR data will have that. And we use there is a common vocabulary defined in OHDSI, and we find the mapping relationship, which is called maps2 in this table to do the direct mapping and indirect mapping. And here is the basic results of our mapping status. So after removing the duplicates, there is a total number of around 5,726 MedDRA PD terms and around 19,000 MedDRA LLT terms that have a mapping to at least one of the ICD codes in UMLS and OHDSI. And we have cross-checking with MedDRA 23.1 version of release, the official document. So to have an idea of what's the total number of the PD terms. And we discovered that a total of 6,413 number of PD terms that are being mapped cover about 27.23% of all the MedDRA PD terms. So we only have a coverage percentage of 27% across all the MedDRA PD terms. So, and we also did a analysis of what is the mapping status trend from the UMLS documents. So we basically extract the AB version of the UMLS file for each year for the past 11 years. And as you can see that since the year of 2010, the number of terms added each year has been increasing. And before the 2016 release, there were no LLT mapping in UMLS. So we can see an increase of the total number of terms since 2016. However, the percentage of the terms that are being mapped has been slowly decreasing, which shows the need to develop more mapping relationships between terms. And here is a mapping distribution. And you can see that only a few SOC has a mapping percentage that is above 50%. And for the SOC category, the general disorder and investigation, they have the lowest mapping coverage, below 10%. And especially investigation that has the highest number of PT, but only 4.82% that were mapped in either UMLS or OHDSI. And we believe the reason is because a described concept related to medical conditions, it could be out of the scope of the ICD. And here is the evaluation for the mapping relationship. So for the purpose of the evaluation, we actually developed the mapping categories based on this Venn diagram. So the A and B represent for different concept, different group of concepts. And so according to this graph, there are 4 relationships. First is that A and B has partial overlap, and the concept B is that A is broader than B, and the third situation is that A is narrower than B, and 4 just represent that A and B is totally irrelevant. And then responding to our map evaluation, responding to that PD term is narrower than ICD term, or that PD term is broader than ICD term, or they're partial overlap, or they're totally irrelevant. And for the purpose of our evaluation, we also include that PT term is exact match as the ICD term, because that is the thing we want to know. And so for the map group evaluation, we recruited 2 experienced clinicians to classify those terms, and to ensure the quality, we first calculated the inter-reader reliability score by assigning them the same 100 terms for both 2 evaluation that we did, and we only proceed our evaluation until they reach 80% agreement. So here's the results for our map group evaluations. As you can see, among all the map pairs provided by UMLS, our annotators found only 51.44% as exact match. And we had a colon kappa inter-reader reliability score of 0.88. So it indicates that our evaluators are pretty confident about that result. And we also did the evaluation for the unmapped group because we wanted to explore what are the reasons that about 70% remains unmapped, and if there's any further mapping that we can discover. So we utilized the approximate match function from the UMLS methodology first, as you can see in this screenshot. So we can choose which term that we want to find, and we can choose which version. And also we can choose the relationship of the term which we use approximate match. However, there are some limitations that we identify in the process according to our annotators. The algorithm is not really good for the approximate match. Sometimes they think the best match term appeared after the ranking of 1,000 return results from this browser API. So we actually developed our own computer algorithm to compare the unmapped term for both MedDRA and ICD. And here is the results of our unmapped group evaluations. We identify, so among a total of 2,400 terms, we actually identify another 56 terms that we believe it has an exact match pair relationship between the MedDRA and ICD term. So just to briefly summarize and give a conclusion. First, some data point that the overall percentage of the PD coverage in both UMLS and OHDSI is 27%. And the map pair through the QEID mapping in UMLS determined that only 51% are considered exact match by our annotators. And we further evaluate the unmapped terms and determined that there are still 56 of which is according to around 2.5% still have the exact match pair from the unmapped group. And the same mapping relationship that we identify in both map and unmapped groups suggests that the use of UMLS may require further examination for its exact map relationships, and that we believe that there is a potential for expansion to the MedDRA and ICD mapping. So I'd like to thank my committee member and my superior fellowship, and thank you for listening.
Great, thank you, Xin Yuan. Do we have any question from the audience?
Yeah, I want to. Okay, go.
Yeah, Oliver, go ahead.
First. Yeah, I want to ask one question as well. Yeah.
Go ahead, Oliver.
Okay, I go first. Okay, so that's a wonderful talk. Yeah, one question I have is related to the mapping percentage, right? So as we can see, the mapping is in general not that high, right? So seldomly it's over 50%. So I'm wondering if it's somehow associated with the nature of these two systems, right? So let's say, for example, the ICD is more for disease classification, right? And the MedDRA is more for adverse event reporting. So they have been used differently. So for the nature of the development, maybe sometime because of their different focuses, they may use different terms. Also, you think, oh, they should be similar, but it seems like they are not. What I don't know what you think about this. Is because they indeed have a lot of kind of differences in terms of the different purposes of the two systems.
Yeah, I think that's a really good. Yeah, I think that's a really good question, and I believe that is definitely one of the reasons. So as we discussed before, so among all the 27 SOC, and we discussed, for example, the investigation, it's an SOC with a lot of the PD terms available, but the only 4.8% were mapped in either UMLS and OHDSI. And we believe that is because of the different scope of the two terminology, because the investigation SOC is describing the concept related to medical conditions and the qualitative results. So it could be out of the scope of ICD, but we didn't rule out that SOC during our evaluation because there are still 5% that are mapped. And I think the other reason that we find a lower percentage of the exact match, I think, is because we have a really strict standard for the from the annotator. And I think the second reason is because of the granularity of two terminologies different. So maybe ICD tends to describe the term in a more broader scope sometimes in a more narrow scope. So the two terminologies sometimes just doesn't align with each other. So that's why we have a relatively high percentage of, so if you combine all the percentage for narrower, broader, and the exact match is actually like more than 90%. But because we are having a really strict standard here that we want those two terms to be exactly the same meaning, not one is broader or narrower. That's why we only identify about 50% that are from the annotators. And we believe that this result is meaningful because sometimes if we wanted to understand adverse reactions, we want to know the exact term, not like the different scope, because it could be from different position, different body position, or different level of severity. And sometimes we just want to know the exact match.
Okay, thank you. Yeah.
Ashia?
I'm not surprised by the low mapping result because I expect so. The way of people describing the adverse event is totally different with doctors to conduct diagnose. So a lot of things doctor will not think is a diagnose are considered as adverse event, like suicide thoughts. I don't know, those things are captured. And there are a lot of weird things that people report. So that is not surprising for me. But I think I want to know your purpose for this. Do you want to kind of pull out EHR and identify the adverse events by doing this mapping?
So I think our original purpose is to validate the signal that we found from the FAIRS database, the adverse reaction system. So we have identified like the potential relationships between the drug and its adverse reactions. And we wanted to verify such signal that we detected in EHR, because first, it's a large-scale database. Second, like majority of the hospital are using such records, and it has a better accuracy than the FAIRS database, because FAIRS is a self-reported, is also a spontaneous system. So when we are trying to verify such signal, so we wanted to have a term that is corresponding to the adverse reaction from FAIRS, which is recorded using the preferred term from MedDRA system, right? And the only thing we can find that is kind of related is ICD code, because we have the EHR system that don't utilize the UMLS. So we only have the ICD code that is available. And we don't want to abandon such large scale and valuable data set just because they're not using MedDRA, right? So we have to figure out a way to link the MedDRA to the ICD code so we can verify our detected relationship in the EHR.
Yes, I'm getting disturbed. Anyway, yeah, so I want to mention that the Odyssey symposium just happened this week, and they had conducted some verification for the vaccine adverse event. Are you part of it? That is just a comment and maybe make you aware of their work. And then I know people at FDA wanted to do utilize EHR for adverse events, but yes, that's why your work is very valuable. And then I don't know if you have thought about to more connect to the phenotype than the diagnosis itself, and perhaps you have to involve some NLP from the doctor's notes. And then another comment about verification is that FDA usually find a signal from the VAERS database or the adverse event reporting system, and then they also identify the signal from the literature. A lot of times the doctors reported the adverse event in the literature rather than the patient or the industries or people report to the system. So they combine these two, and then they identify the signal and then use the EHR to verify it. But as you are a researcher, you can think a lot of innovative way to try to help for identify those safety signals. I think it's very important.
Definitely, and I think your comments are really helpful, and I will follow up with the Odyssey, their latest progress. That is really helpful. Thank you.
Welcome.
Thank you. Well, actually, I have one quick question you might have already addressed. So about the inter-rater agreement. So the 80% agreement was somewhat, the cutoff where you move to the next step. So how did you handle, when there were, disagreement between, two experts?
Yeah, definitely. So I actually had to schedule 2 meetings. So first, I randomly assigned 100 term students, and for the first time, their agreement is, I think it's around like 60%. So I actually arranged a meeting for the 2 annotators to sit. It was before COVID, so it's like face to face, and so that this can discuss. So if they have a disagreement of a certain term, and what is the reason? What were they thinking when they're assigning the category for the annotations? Is it because they have a different understanding of the classification category, or that they have different understanding of the terms itself? So we had them just sit down to discuss with each other, and then after the second meeting, I assigned another 100 terms to them, and for them to annotate independently, separately, with no discussion. And then it actually reached more than 80%. So I moved on the annotation.
Okay, and for the actual annotation, I mean, those 2 annotators would probably have resulted in some differences for certain annotation. And was there any third one, like you or someone else who broke the tie if there was a disagreement?
Yeah, so after the final annotation, if they still have a disagreement, I actually arranged another meeting for them to review their differences, because there's not a lot. And so they had another discussion, and they reached the same conclusion after the final meeting. So actually at the end is around, the final results is about like 100% agreement.
I see. Okay, thank you.
Thank you.
All right, do we have any other questions? If not, let's thank Shin Yuan, and we move on to the next talk.